So welcome to the Node.js Community Package Maintenance Team meeting for February 14th, 2019. We'll start following our standard agenda. Does anybody have any announcements before we get started that they'd like to make? No, okay. Then we'll move on to the issues which were tagged with the agenda. As I was saying earlier, just for people who've joined the stream, in the first meeting, we had a good discussion of sort of, generally, how do we get started? What should we start working on? Out of that, we created a number of issues. I did tag some of those with the agenda issue just so that we can get a quick update on those, as well as a few others I thought that we could talk about. The auto generator will tag everything for the agenda that's tagged with package maintenance agenda. So if you ever want to put anything on the agenda, just add that tag and it'll automatically be added to the list. But before we move on, is there anything that people want to add on to the list before we get started? Sounds like not. So the first thing that's tagged is baseline practices, brainstorm the initial list. I know that was one of the sort of three things that we discussed getting started on. And Edgar helped and worked with us to open this issue with an initial list of some questions. And there has been a good discussion in that issue in terms of, what some of the different practices might be. At this point, I think the next step might be for us to sort of gather the discussion together and then create some sub-items in terms of like concrete processes to start trying to document or identify and open issues specifically for them. One thing we did do is we did create a directory in the repo itself. So under the repo, there is now a docs that contains a README, and then a drafts. So I think those are places we could start PRing in either something in draft if we don't think it's quite ready, or into the docs that we would be pointing people to. So that's a place where people can start to open PRs for documentation. A little bit of the discussion, I forget which issue, but on one of them was, we could do it PRM directly to the website, but we thought maybe collecting it in this repo first, and then once we sort of hit critical mass, we can think about whether we need to move things to the website and stuff like that. So the discussion there was to try and start working on things in this repo to start with. So on that particular issue, is there the people participating in that one? Is there anything that they want to highlight or get more broader discussion going on at this point?
I would just add that I'm in full support of the plan to have everything in the repo before it goes to the website. I think, as this issue made pretty clear, there's a ton of discussion and a ton of different points. And I think it's probably going to take a fair bit of time before we have something that's really solid that would be worth putting on the website. And it'd be unfortunate to put it on the website too early and have it be incomplete or misleading or anything like that.
Yeah, thanks, Wes. That's definitely, I think, a very good point. Okay, so I think unless people have any other suggestions, I think really the next step is to sort of loop back through that issue and see if we can pull out specific ones that we want to start working on, or at least in maybe an overview of, what are the ones that are suggested, so that we could then create sub-items that were sort of built off that. So maybe what I'll do is I'll post into the issue. And I guess, Rick, you were involved in helping with that issue as well. Would you want to volunteer to kind of try and pull together the summary of what the discussion has been, and here's like the particular practices we should open new issues for?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, so yeah, so if you take that action, let me just take a quick note in the minutes. So,
Do you want me to assign that particular one to me in GitHub so that way it's known or as
yep,
well? Or?
sure, yeah, you can assign it to yourself.
Oops, I actually don't have permission to do anything on it.
That is true. Yeah, okay. So why don't I do that for now? Yeah, we don't have all the permissions and everything quite right yet.
That's understandable.
Actually, I don't think I can yet. So if we just, I'm going to say, sorry, I'm in the wrong place, I don't know how I somehow became incognito, which is not what I need to be. I'm just going to comment in the issue itself that you're going to take the next action.
Cool.
Or I guess you can do that.
Yeah. I'll
okay, yeah, why don't you just comment in the issue that you have the next action, which is to sort of summarize, and hopefully if we have like a list of these are the ones, we could then open issues to start working on like content for the specific ones.
Okay.
For specific. Okay. Also, if anybody else wants to help out with keeping the minutes and updating the minutes, feel free to jump in. Okay, so the next issue on the agenda is discussion on the Node.js Slack channel. So that's number 118. In terms of that, there was basically discussion on how we might talk more directly than through GitHub. I think, there was consensus at the end that we could move forward with Slack. And so there is a Slack channel opened and a channel that was created. So this is more of a sort of an FYI. So if people want to join that Slack, and that's a place where people may ask questions or post things in real time versus GitHub. Although I still expect most of the conversations will be in GitHub. Any questions or comments or concerns on that front?
There's a link on the README that is not working to join that Node Slack group.
Well, let me take a look at that just quickly.
Just so you know, I think it's a manual process. I got added from that link, but it was like days later, which maybe is a problem in and of itself.
Yeah,
Actually,
so that is, so there's the.
I think this one is more of a it's not connecting, or I'm getting like just clicking the link, it just takes forever to load the Node Slackers URLs. I think what she's implying about.
Yeah, which one are you? Is it the link that says Node.js Slack or a different one?
It is the one that if it says send a request, under
yes.
communications, that one is the one that is timing out.
Okay, so that's one I've actually been working with one of the maintainers. We have had some concern over like the Node Slack link itself used to have a list of email addresses that confused people. We managed to remove that. The other one was the registration, as you said, it seemed to like be semi-manual or take some amount of time. So I have been talking to the maintainer, and he actually proposed he start using a new Slack registration tool, which was an existing repo that he cloned. I actually then, at a suggestion, sort of took that and customized it for what might be used. And I think he was going to try, the last message I had is he was going to try and see if he could deploy that. Maybe that's why the link isn't working, is that he's in the middle of updating that at this point. But I'll follow up with him and mention that it's not working. But also to say, we hope that this new registration tool will be more timely, if not immediate. But thanks for, so FYI about Availability of Slack channel. I was going to say comment about one of the links not working.
Also, if in the comments, someone mentioned that the link would work in HTTP, but the link is showing HTTPS in the README, and that is correct. It is working in HTTP.
Okay, so let me. Right, that would make sense.
Sounds
okay,
like
so it was just yeah. So in terms of what we landed, I don't know if anybody can open a PR to fix that. If somebody wants to volunteer, otherwise, so who was that?
Emily, are you gonna do it? Emily's got it.
Yes, I just had to find the mute button. Thanks. I'll do that.
Okay, great. So yeah, if you open a PR, we'll make sure to get that landed and fixed up. So obviously, yeah, it's pointing at the old one, but we didn't quite get the link right. So great. Okay, so I'm going to say Emily will send fix URL for registration, which seems to be okay. I like things that we can fix quickly. Okay, I think that's that one. I will then actually untag as off the agenda and actually close, since you know, I think we're done the discussion there. Obviously, pending getting it actually working in the README, but that can be handled in the separate PR. Okay, just gotta do that. Okay. Right. So next issue was number 113, which is which problems Node.js OSS maintainers authors face today. That was number 113. Matteo, who was with us last time but can't make it today because he's traveling and in a different time zone, opened that one after our discussions from last week. Again, there's been some good discussion back and forth. I'm thinking, you know, maybe we can spend a few minutes discussing what we think the next step on that one is. You know, people have thoughts of like, are there ways, what ways do we think we should apply to try and get more input from maintainers? Because the idea here was to try and build up, we're sort of coming from the best practices side, we're thinking about what we think will help maintainers. We were thinking we should try and, you know, find out, go from the, you know, the problem space to get input on what do maintainers have the most problems with. And that's this one. So it's like, really, I think from that perspective, we need probably more different maintainers chiming in saying, these are the kind of issues that we have, or to somehow come up with a list.
Yeah, so Glenn here. What I've seen is, and I've copied you on a few emails, just for the people I'm trying. There are a lot of packages that already have maintainers, and essentially they've inherited them. And what they're really looking for, I see, is expertise in certain areas to fix things they can't do themselves. And I've just been looking at the Node API ones, which I think I can help on. But I think generally, I'm guessing people are either overwhelmed, they don't have time, or there are things that have taken on that they can't quite cope with. And perhaps it always falls into those three areas. And we've got to actually engage a bit more with package maintainers. I didn't see much talk about, well, I didn't see much mention of named maintainers and problems they were having. So a lot of this is going to be a hypothesis. Unless we actually start engaging with people that have problems, we won't have real feedback. There you go. That's my 2 cents worth.
And I think that's exactly what I was thinking, is that we need to figure out how do we get those named maintainers, you know, we had some discussion there, but we want to move beyond the hypothesis, or at least get a broader sample set. Like, Matteo does maintain modules, and I'm sure a few other people are, but it would be good to have a broader input. And what we should figure out today maybe is what are the next few steps in terms of getting that broader input. Should we pick some maintainers or pick some projects and go and then reach out? If we had a list of 20 people, we could have, we could break up that list and say, well, I'll go reach out to these people, and then somebody else will reach out to the others. But that's just one idea of how we might do it. What do people think is a good way to try and sort of start that engagement?
So to piggyback off, maybe Matteo also brought up the idea of having some friendlies, right?
Yep.
Which I wrapped into the other issue that's on the agenda, which is our stages of who we engage with. I think if we make that list should probably be the exact same list we use for who we go and talk to first and pilot some of our ideas with. So we could do that. My proposal then would be that we could look at just some of the popular, really prolific authors. So I think, Simon Bujos, or I don't know how to say his last name. He has, hundreds of modules. Substack might be a good person. Those people who maintain hundreds of packages, I think, would have a very unique insight that would maybe help us understand the problem at a level that is different from a one-off maintainer who might maintain, a package or two. I think that would be a good way to maybe look at it.
Right. Okay. That makes sense to me. So do you think we should generate that list when we discuss the issue that you opened, which I think is, it's one of the ones that's coming up, right? That's tagged.
Wait, it's like the problem repositories?
The number 105, right?
Or key packages, yeah.
Yeah. So we could brainstorm it as part of that discussion, or we could, because I agree that, starting with some friendlies and, a list of, I don't know, 5 or whatever would be a really good way to start to get some initial feedback. And we might be able to then, once you have a little bit more of a context, it's easier to then, maybe go out with a survey or whatever, something more broadly.
The people who are maintaining hundreds of packages are really kind of the outlier, I feel like. And so, while their input is going to be valuable, I'm not sure if they're necessarily the first people we should reach out to. Just kind of throwing that out there. There's lots of people who have a lot of their time on open source eaten up by one or two projects. And so, I think those people are probably much more widespread than the really prolific authors.
Right.
I think that's a really good point. If we're going to brainstorm people, the PG package is maintained mainly by Brian Carlson. I think he would be a good person who fits maybe more into that category, where he maintains, one very large and important package.
Okay, so I think the net is, though, that we want to develop a list of people that we'll reach out to for feedback. And maybe it is, I think there's probably a couple different categories of people or whatever. Like, I still think, finding some friendlies who maybe maintain a bunch would be good to get some input from. But then also pulling in, some other smaller, and not smaller, but like, somebody who maintains, just 1 or 2 packages. So maybe we should just, open an issue to put together that list, people that we want to reach out to. And then, I'm sure each of us will have different ideas, and we'll come up with a list that sort of, is a good representation of all of those if we do it that way.
Would you like that issue to be the same one, which would have been so I was going to open 3. I've been quite busy with some other things. One of them was the pilot packages, would that be a good, use of double purpose there?
Yeah. So I guess, Chris, I'll flip that back to you. Do you think there's any reason that people you think should be on the list might not fit into the pilot packages list?
What list are we looking at? What the pilot packages meaning? Oh, you're asking if these should be two separate lists, basically.
Effectively, yeah. Like, is there any reason you don't think that we could start with, here's our list of initial list. It was going to be like our friendly people that we're going to go out and sort of try and work with them as our pilot. Does it make sense to just use the same list, or should we actually have two lists because, somebody should be on our list of people that we go and try and reach out for input, but wouldn't necessarily make it onto the pilot list? Or
I have no idea.
okay. I think, Wes, then maybe if we just start with that list, we generate it, and then we can figure that out, right?
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Okay. Okay, so on that one, is there other things that people should think we should talk about? I mean, I think next step is that we need that list, and then encourage, in that issue, we should get volunteer. Once we have a list, we should get volunteers of who's going to go reach out to each of the people on the list in terms of saying, hey, this is what we're doing. Can we have some of your time and input? Is there anything else we should be doing in parallel, or any other discussion we should have on that issue before we move on?
I joined a little late. What was the issue that we're talking through?
We're currently talking about number 113.
Thanks.
Which is the list where we're trying to work through a baseline of what challenges are maintainers facing today. And we just got into a discussion where we thought we needed to actually have more input from maintainers themselves to push that forward.
This might have gotten talked about in the previous meetings. I missed a couple. I apologize. Is there been any discussion of like some sort of automation to say, like, for example, the new buffer changes? There was a lot of feedback there. I haven't touched this module in 2 years, and now I have to go change the new buffer or buffer.from to new buffer. Those are the types of things that can easily be like a bot can do that, and then make pull requests for people. Have there been any thoughts or discussions around that for some of the things that are out there today? Like, I mean, most of the major packages have updated from to new buffer, but I don't know what other upcoming changes of that nature are on the horizon.
There was an issue sort of talking about like automation in terms of sending emails to maintainers. The discussion in that one, I think, kind of triangulated to, we want to sort of figure out and have some, figure out what we think makes sense before we start automating and potentially sort of annoying people with things.
Okay.
There's been maybe also, just to add, there's been maybe 3 or 4 issues that have been open that haven't been talked about in the other meeting or on the agenda here. Actually, well, maybe a few of them have made it on the agenda, but that talk about what things we could automate. There's some specific ones in the repo that might be worth linking to from the agenda that I don't think made it here.
Sure. So why don't we, maybe if we get through the agenda and then we can loop back to those, does that make sense? We'll see what else is in the repo we haven't talked about.
Yeah, that sounds great.
The thing I would say though is, if driving that might be good. You mentioned the buffer one, so that's a perfect example that says, if we know there's something currently being faced by maintainers, that's maybe another good way to address this, is to say, okay, here's a particular issue. What are the kind of things that would help maintainers in that case?
It also, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Michael.
No, go ahead.
It also sort of turns what is somewhat tedious work into like the fun part of coding, which is make a bot, make a bot that does a code mod and makes PRs, and you could make an issue for that and somebody could go implement it independently. We did in the very early days of Node, I think it was the 04 to 06 migration, we did an experiment with an intern at Nodejitsu where they wrote a bot like this and made like 20,000 PRs or some absurd number of pull requests automatically. And a lot of them got merged. So I don't know how much it's going to annoy people. Like that's another way to think about it, but I could also see it being very valuable.
Yeah. So that's where, like, I think we should, if we, maybe worth opening in it. If there was like if for example, if buffer hadn't been addressed, it would be like, hey, what can we do for buffer? Oh, we could create a bot. Then I think we'd want to test that against some of the module owners to say, well, do you want to be getting automated PRs for something like that? Or is that not something you'd want to see? And if we then confirm that most of the maintainers say, hey, this is, yeah, I'd like this.
Yeah. I think the opt-in part of it is considerate, and the necessary level of considerate that we want to be, and not just throwing PRs at people. Right.
Like, so for example, in that case, if there was somewhere where basically, we evangelized it everywhere, but then you actually said you PR'd your module into a list, which triggered the bot to send things to you. I could see that being, who could complain about that, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's just the question of the efficacy of the bot. Like sometimes it makes mistakes and other stuff. Yep. So it's an interesting area to explore. And I just wasn't sure if that had been brought up before. It sounds like there could be some useful discussion there in an issue down the road.
Yeah. Well, I think, opening an issue, and even the like capturing that, the experience of having done that the last time.
Yeah, I'll try and dig up the bot that we used. This is, the ancient history at this point, but it did work. One of the challenges was you have to have a source for all those things to be PR'd from. So you need to make an organization for the bot to PR to, and then, right, because that has to fork it and then PR it. Right. So
we have that in this repo, I guess. Do we? Maybe not.
No, you need a new org, right? Because you're forking other people's stuff to that org, and then it PRs from there. I'm trying to remember what the name of the bot was. I'll look it up for a bit. And open an issue.
I mean, and I guess it would come back to like, maybe if you opened an issue and do you think you've said a bunch of, a lot of people have fixed the buffer issues, but I'm not sure all. So maybe it's still a concrete one to sort of prove out if that's the right concept, and we could do something with that this time.
For the buffer issue in particular, I actually looked into that and I submitted a bunch of PRs, so a bunch of repos fixing it. And at least as far as I can tell, it's not entirely automatable, because replacing the buffer constructor is easy, but you have to make a choice between, I think, buffer alloc and buffer from. And the choice depends on the value of the parameter that you use to pass to the constructor. And so that value cannot always be statically determined. Like, is it a constant? Like if you pass a variable in, that variable could be a number, in which case you want buffer alloc, or it could be a string, in which case you want buffer from. And so this decision is not easy to make. So I actually wrote the script that would replace all the buffer constructors, but I had to go in after the script was done and edit at times, because the tests weren't passing in the end for that particular module. So in this particular case, I'm not sure that it can be automated, but I'm sure there are other tasks which can be. So the idea of a bot is not necessarily bad. I just don't think it would work for the buffer constructor in particular.
Right. Yeah, although you structure it as like a code mod bot, right? Like most of the infrastructure is, fork the thing, make the PR.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess, in the context of this group, if we had something that would go through and do that, and then, basically have a bunch of branches that were ready to PR, but required help from people to go through and actually make actually submit the PR, we could build a list of here's a work list that of people who want to help, of things they could do, right?
Yeah, I'm remembering this now. This was when exists and exists sync moved from the path module to the FS module, I think in 06 or 08, and that there was a lot of hubbub about it. And we, one of the folks on our team just made a bot that changed path to FS for you. And I dropped one of the sample PRs in there. So just something to think about. I think that it could help solve a lot of it also gives the Node core team a lot of flexibility. Like if we can prove that this automated, update the ecosystem pattern has legs, then maybe we can be a little bit more flexible in making some of those changes,
Yeah, it's certainly worth exploring. Would you be willing to take an action to open an issue to sort of get the discussion and progress on that front going?
Yeah, especially since we have this good case study from, again, it's ancient history now in Node days, but it's some good data to show how it worked.
And I think, still the buffer, unless we think that's completely finished, that one may be a concrete one where we can, try some things out and see if we can make progress on. Okay, so I think looping back to the original conversation is we're going to generate that list of people we can reach out to. I think we agreed will be the same. This will be our first pass, at least, will be captured in the same in one of the issues in the issues. Wes is going to open for 105. That makes sense. Okay, I'll take silence as agreement. So maybe next one is 105. So process to identify and engage with key packages. Wes, do you want to give a quick update on that?
Yeah, sure. It sounded like from the issue that everybody was on board with this little three-phase path. So I have, like I mentioned just a little bit earlier, been a bit busy. So I haven't opened the 3 issues, but that's my next step for that. Maybe I can tackle that this week. I just want to do a little synopsis of what each of the 3 phases. So the idea is we can't just take something and open it up to everyone right away. We need to try out what our ideas are, iterate on them before we lock ourselves into hundreds of packages we're supporting. So we'll do a 3-phase approach where we'll pick some pilot partners, being, partners being the authors and maintainers of these packages. We'll work with them with whatever. So if we make some automation, we'd run it through these packages first, make sure it works with them, take their feedback, or if there's checklists or best practices that we develop for maintenance, if there's LTS commitments we want to make, those kind of things, we'd run them past these people first, and then once we have a good foundation, we'd then take that and try to engage with more more maintainers. Those maintainers would then get a little bit less hands-on with us, but we'd work with them to do that. And then in the end, we'd like to automate the onboarding process. So that's sort of the 3rd phase is once we have all these practices, figure out a way that a module author without anybody's help can say like, hey, look, I subscribe to these best practices, these tooling approaches, and get them automated on board without us having to help. So that's the 3 phases. So I'm going to open up 3 issues, one for each of them, just to continue the discussion.
Sounds good. Any questions, comments before we move on to the next issue? No? Okay, let's move on. So the next one on the agenda is number 93. Sorry, did I get that right? No, yeah, number 93, which is discourage use of unmaintained packages. That one, I think there was some, good discussion, and I mostly put it on just again to, I think if we get more people commenting or getting involved in that, or even what are people's thoughts in terms of, trying to make it clear what modules are no longer maintained.
So my thought or fear about that is we may believe a module is unmaintained. We may see that there have been PRs raised that have been ignored for several years. But that maintainer may be very active working on other quite significant projects. And it's really a case of they own the project, whether they're maintaining it or not. They're still doing very active stuff in the community. how do they feel about that? And how do we feel about that when labeling them? Because I was a little bit arrogant and when I first started looking at things, and then I looked at some of the other things a person had been doing. I thought, oh my God, I use this person's stuff everywhere. And I may have been too hasty in my feelings about what was maintained and what was. And it's a very hard thing to actually say. They're just, how do you approach somebody that's doing great work and they obviously will have stuff they haven't looked at, that they haven't taken PRs for, and label it as unmaintained? How do they feel about that?
I don't think the discussion in the issue was about us labeling anything. I think it was more around, are there things or tools or best practices, or baseline practices that we can come up with which encourage maintainers who feel that their module is no longer maintained and wish people didn't use it. So it's easy for them to just say, don't use this anymore. And then on the flip side, it's very easy for people using modules to know, well, wait a second, I'm using some ones which are no longer maintained. Either, they were already in my dependency tree and now they're unmaintained. What do I do? Or I'm going to choose one. Okay, I won't choose that one because the maintainer thinks it's kind of unmaintained.
I think the biggest challenge that I see is ghosting.
Okay.
And ghosting to me is you're just not there. And it's not like, oh, you're consciously not there, like I'm ignoring people, but how do you avoid labeling people when, if it's not opt-in, so unless if it's not just, oh, they come to us and say, I'm not maintaining this anymore, please help spread the word, then you are going to be labeling. But at a certain point, there is like a SLA for somebody opened an issue where they want to be a contributor or they want to join your project, and you ignored that for some period of time. Let's go with 3 months.
Right.
There is some, you have ghosted, you are no longer present. If you want to come back and say, I'm sorry I ghosted, that's fine. I've ghosted before and come back 6 months later and been like, yeah, I ghosted, my dad died, I'm sorry. But you ghosted, you did, objectively you ghosted, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. I think that's the way you diffuse that is it happens, but objectively speaking, you didn't do these things, so you ghosted.
Yeah, and I say again, I think the period actually wouldn't be months. I think it would be a year plus, probably.
Sure. Yeah.
Several. I see ones with PRs raised from several years back. Who knows what?
But to be clear, there's a difference between a PR being open for several years and somebody ghosting, and then there's another entire difference, right, between a package that you as the maintainer just don't think needs updates, right? Like right. It could be 5 years old and it could be, in my opinion, perfect.
Yep.
And I'm not ghosted, but I'm also not going to spend my time going back and hand holding every person who thinks that this package, which is tiny, needs something. Right. Totally. So there's all these different states, and we just need to make sure whatever solution we do.
That's the thing. Yeah. How do we automatically define, automate perfection, ghosting, or whatever we wish to classify it as?
The classic, when you look at the objective definition of ghosting, you didn't update new buffer, and you haven't changed it in over a year, and somebody opened a PR moving it to buffer.from. And you haven't merged that PR. There's when you're not keeping up to date with the platform, those are the places where it's really objective that you're not present. Because even if it is perfect and you're having that sort of, the artisanal versioning conversation, which is fine, you still have to make it work with the latest node and the latest whatever. So you'll still see a little activity. You'll still see some versions.
I guess some of the discussion there, my first question is, do we think that that maintainers, so that ghosting is a problem, people just disappear, okay, so that's one issue. Is it not a problem of maintainers who are active but haven't indicated that it's deprecated? Or because I'm thinking an easier first step is to say, how do we make it so that more maintainers who think it's no longer maintained taken action so that it's clear, or is that just not a problem? Like, is that so small that it doesn't matter?
There is the case that npm deprecate is a fairly new thing, right?
Right.
Relatively. And not a lot of people know about it. So there's definitely a case of advocating the use of that.
Right.
And there's definitely a case for advocating of not depending on packages that have been marked as deprecated or versions that have been marked as deprecated. And then there's, as for the case of ghosting, where somebody just stops maintaining and updating, I mean, somebody has to fork that module and make it better and more popular.
Yeah, I think that's, go ahead.
And then you get people to depend on the forked, better, more maintained version. And there is no, it doesn't have to be, or rather it has to not be this negative thing where you label somebody as a publisher who no longer maintains a package.
So can I just say on the forking and making it more popular, I think there is a active issue in some of this, and I think it came from this repo on the npm CLI to help. I might have been registry because I think it's a registry feature to help try to come up with a way that npm can help transition people. I'll look for it and I'll try to link it up here. They said no to the issue, but I think they didn't understand the context fully, and they were recommending use of a different thing they're trying to.
Well, I mean, npm is in many ways trying to make things reliable. You know, like the way that they changed unpublish a couple of years back is a great example of that. Like once the content is there, the content is there, and it is the same Git repo or things like that. So, you know, when the Git repo changes between version 1 and version 2 because you've passed the stewardship on, I could see them being really against that in principle from a like transparency, reliability, security model, threat model perspective.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think the suggestion, I'll have to find the link to get the full context, but I think the suggestion was to be able to label a package as basically an alias for another package, so that if you had the forking case, right, you could just say, you could publish a thing in your package JSON that would say, hey, the API here is actually a fork of this other package. If you were looking at that package and now it's unmaintained, you could actually just drop in this package at this version and be feature compatible. And then you could then decouple people from the old package and then upgrade from there. Something like that was, I think, the proposal, which I think for this use case is almost a requirement if we're actually going to try to, the popularity thing that, that was mentioned, I think is like really the hard part, right? Is because it doesn't matter if you have a great package unless you can actually convert the old users to use the new package.
Right.
And then back to like the deprecation side. I mean, one you know, so I think Dominica's comment is like maybe we should put some effort into helping to promote. Like if we think that npm deprecate helps this case, we should help do some work to promote it. We could put together a blog post, get the node.js account to tweet that, you know, and we can make sure that we incorporate it into the baseline practices for module maintainers.
Definitely, and there's just one catch there is when some module gets deprecated, the maintainers who depend on it get a bunch of issues that they have to then deal with.
Right.
So I don't know whether there's some automation. The alias thing I'm trying to look up. I think it was in npm RFC's repo. Can't find it right now. But,
yeah, now that you say that, I think you're right. Yeah.
Now, in terms of those issues, does it end up showing up to end users when they're doing an install?
Yes.
Right. So now the maintainers are going to have, yeah. So that can be okay. Because the other thing I was.
Deprecate just means like this is gone now. Like a classic example is like the Babel dash packages, I think, are all now deprecated, and you see the at Babel packages are now the main lines as they moved from 6 to 7.
Right.
So and I wanted to point out that that's actually I think a big failure in using this feature. They're not deprecated. they are no longer going to receive updates. There's a difference, right? The package fully worked, and Deprecate's original design was to say, like, look, that has a bug, that has a security vulnerability, don't use it. And I think there's a big distinction between the two, right? Because I might not care because my function.
Yeah.
Right. One, there's unmaintained and deprecated. And okay.
Well,
and one doesn't,
yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, well, especially in a world where unpublish stops after 24 hours when you can't remove things, like, oh, that has a bug, remove it. It's like a deprecate
Update
warning.
my packages because my team members were annoyed at my deprecation warnings, but the functionality worked fine, which is different than, right? So we just have to.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's another discussion under the best practices where I was suggesting we like try and advocate for something like in your package JSON that's your support level. And the lowest level of that is like, this is unmaintained. We don't recommend you use it anymore. And then it sort of goes up from, and I probably don't have all the right gradations, but it goes up to, hey, I support this, all the LTS release lines or whatever. Or actually, no, I think, and there was another discussion that sort of had a dimension between, what do you support it for? LTS, just the latest, and so forth. And then separately than that, you could sort of have something that asserts your support level. Is it like, I don't use it? Or, hey, I'm a one person, I did this in my spare time. So if you want to use it at your own risk. Do I have an organization like, is it part of the node.js organization? So there's a project behind it. Is there a company that's, committed to support and so forth, right? So I guess maybe it's that you need a little bit more subtlety than deprecate or non-deprecated. So
agreed. I think it'll be hard until we can come up with. So like if you're thinking putting it in the package JSON, the engines field obviously had its problems and stuff like that. That's one thing. If we do the same for like what's your SLA, we're going to need a really defined set of SLA, yes. Right? So I think maybe a better place to start would be to come up with some best practice recommendations and give people like an NPM module that just generates an SLA.md file or something and just say like, hey, start putting this in here. Here's some common SLAs, right? Kind of common licenses, and people are using tooling to just generate their license files. That would be maybe a better middle ground.
I think you want like, what I was thinking is you want something like licenses where there's like common identifiers for the common licenses. So, we need to develop like, maybe you start with here's just your 5 SLAs and here's the identifiers. And then you probably want the identifier in the package JSON so it's easy to parse, right? Like you can get it and tell it and it just points to, and then if people want to suggest new SLAs, well, we can add new identifiers for those. So yeah, okay. I guess I wasn't. So you'd suggest that we don't necessarily publicize deprecate because that may not be sending the right signal, and that we should instead start with let's define the SLAs because that's really what you want to communicate more broadly.
Yeah, I think we could publicize deprecate if we are very clear on what its meaning should be, and I'm worried that. Because it was the only tool in our toolbox before and currently, that just publicizing it would result in more things like the Babel migration thing, which just is not a good case study for this feature, in my opinion. Obviously, feel free to disagree.
Yeah. Okay, I think I see that. I can definitely see that, and we don't want to cause noise. So I think the more complete, at least what I'm current thing is the more complete solution of like, here are the SLA levels. It'd be good to sort of figure out what that looks like. And then we can see what the existing deprecate feature looks like in that context and decide whether to say, yeah, oh no, it still makes sense. Let's publicize that, or let's publicize it in the context of it. Here's your SLA levels. When you choose this one, also do this NPM deprecate because there's a tool or something, right? Okay, so we'll try and push that forward as part of the baseline thing. So, it'll likely come out of some of the discussion, and when Rick summarizes it, we'll make sure there's one issue for pushing on those sort of SLA levels. And I think there was like at least a couple of parameters, but they're not coming to me because I think adding, at least defining them, makes it easier for the module owners to decide what they want to say. Any other discussion people have on that one before we move on? Okay, so I think actually 17, which is the next one, is actually related to the discussion we just had. It has to do with displaying a business model. Sorry, no, I think I just opened the wrong one. Or I've got the name. I missed one. Okay, no, 17 is a different one. So it's basically package maintenance issues suggest.
I opened this, so maybe I can just say quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I opened this like really early when the repo was created. I think the discussion here has not happened. My ID here has been covered by a bunch of other issues, and I think the only reason I didn't go and just close it was because I think there's a couple of things that haven't been directly talked about in other issues.
Okay.
And I'm hesitant to waste time talking in this forum about this, since it's been covered in so many other iterations.
Okay, so would you want to just basically, pull out what needs to be continued, still needs discussion, and then close this one?
I think there's two. Yeah, I think it's really that we've talked a lot about. Yeah, yes. I don't want to rabbit hole on this.
So I'm just going to take a note for that. Let me paste. I'm trying to paste the title back in. Sometimes Google Doc does. There we go. Okay. So covered less much content is covered in other issues. We'll pull out what is not an open new issue or issues to cover that. And then close this one. Sounds good. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. And then the last one on the list was the suggestion to display the project's business model, which is one I was thinking is actually similar to a little bit of the discussion we were having on the SLA or the support level. I think there's some number of dimensions that would be useful to have some more information, and coming up with a palette or whatever you want to call it, like a license seems, is now fairly well established to say you should, the baseline practice is you should choose one of these and tell people, what you're doing. And this one fits in that as well, I think, where the business model could also be one where it's like, and this, in the initial description here, it has some overlap with support level. So I think we need to sort of tease that apart in terms of, support may not necessarily directly relate to your business model, but having some information about your business model may make sense in terms of people choosing your module or not. So I guess under base, maybe that just all fits under the baseline practices in terms of we should figure out what are the additional bits of information we might want to let module owners easily tell people about, possibly getting those into the package, the JSONs, or some other way, and having a list that they can choose from. And this one I thought was just interesting because it was another thing that, you say, okay, it's fitting into helping people choose, as well as hopefully helping maintainers make a decision. And then, when people say, well, why aren't you doing X? It's like, well, because I told you this is my business model or my support level or whatever, right? Anybody else have any other comments or discussion on that one? Okay, I think we're pretty much at the end of time. Unfortunately, we haven't had time to then loop back to the other issues. So I'd say if there's ones you want us to discuss the next time, maybe just tag them with the agenda issue, and they'll pop up the next time. The other thing I would like us to start discussing, so I'll either see if I can find somebody or open it myself, is we do want to start, I think, the discussion on how we enable companies to get their people participating and helping out. I don't know, Glenn, if that's something you have an interest in and would want to.
I do. In fact, it's one of the things, and perhaps I can talk offline as this is on YouTube.
Yep. So anyway, yeah. Well, my goal will be before the next meeting for us to, as a team, open a new issue which talks about that issue. I know Ahmad from TELUS was also interested, so we'll figure out who we can get together to start that discussion, because I think that's an important one as well to, figure out how we can get more business engagement and, make it easy for those businesses as well as the individuals who are working there. Any other issues or topics we should talk about before we close for today?
One thing I know sorry, Victor, I didn't mean to jump the gun. One thing I know we talked about was the weekly, or we were going weekly with the meetings, or was that because I know we had the doodle to choose the secondary meeting. Is the calendar going to be updated for the?
Right. So yes,
doodle?
I still need to close that doodle. I think I'd set the target for last Friday. I still saw a few people chiming in this week. So yeah, we'll close that. We'll schedule it. Do we believe every week or every other week is the right cadence? What do people vote for?
I'm not sure. Didn't see the results.
Well, no, that's not it. I meant just separately from that. Like we'll alternate between the two times. But the other question is like, do we want to do it every week or do we think every 2 weeks? Like, will enough happen in 1 week that we should meet every week, or we got enough to discuss? I'm just getting people. What do people think off the top of their head?
Every week is rough for me. Like an hour every week is just a lot with the other meetings I have on Mondays.
We all have a lot of meetings. That's why Edgar isn't here.
Yeah.
It's a meeting.
Right. So maybe every other week is reasonable.
That's reasonable.
It's still fairly regular. Like, it should give us time to accomplish things. We never get as much done as we'd like, but 2 weeks is a long enough time that hopefully we can get something done and have something new to talk about. Okay. So I'll update the calendar so that it's every 2 weeks. And then when I look at the poll, hopefully it'll be obvious what the other time should be. Okay. Sounds good. Anything else? Oh, I just promoted Edgar. We'll see if he has something to. I guess he.
Hey, Edgar.
Hey. Hi. Sorry, I just noticed you were waiting there to join, but we're just about to finish. So I thought I'd let you in to see if you had any comments before we close out the meeting.
I just wanted to get a minor clarification. How do you tag things for discussion? I guess we can talk about that offline, but I noticed you had mentioned it, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody, if anybody had not done it before, just to become familiar with
I
it.
think what I need to do is get people into the team, and then basically when you're on an issue, you should be able to just choose the, like if you're on the issue, there's like a tags on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just collect that tag. But I think I need to get people into the right team so that they'll be able to do that.
Yeah, I think you couldn't do it without certain permissions on the repo.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll take the action to try and get that fixed up too.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's great. Then we'll talk to everybody and certainly through GitHub in the next week, but also then in person in a couple weeks. Thanks for everybody for taking the time. Talk to y'all later.
Later all.
Thanks. Bye.